Welcome to the Mystic Detectives podcast, where we seek to unlock the wonders of the unknown. I'm one of your hosts, Crystal Miller.
And I'm your other host, Andrea Marziano. Great to see you again, Crystal. Anything exciting going on? Anything new you've watched or
Oh
like
my
to share?
gosh. Okay, so I just watched this documentary. It's called Love Has Won, the Mother God Cult or something like that, but it's definitely called Love Has Won. And it's about this woman that one day decided that she was Mother God, started a cult, and then essentially starved herself to death. I mean, I just, that's a spoiler. Sorry, y'all. But like, it was worth watching.
Is this the one where she actually was doing some sort of diet thing too, or was that a different?
No, I think you're thinking of the one that where it started out as a diet thing and then became a cult.
Oh, okay.
And
Yes,
then she died
probably.
in a plane crash or whatever.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
No, this one is, I've never heard of it. And it popped up. Somebody on my TikTok was commenting on it. And just for the 2 minutes that she was talking about it, I was intrigued. And then I watched it. Mind blown. And the interesting thing about it is was really fascinating to me is that as I watched it, there was a lot of what I would call crossover into what we do, except
Really?
that it got culty and weird and I don't know, but I recommend it. It's on Max.
Okay.
Love Has Won, and it is just wild. Just
Wow.
wild.
It's interesting how things can really just change in ways that you would never expect. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people who start things that turn out to be cultish didn't ever really intend it to be something that becomes crazy,
Yeah.
but it can shift that way for whatever reason, and that's another whole podcast.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. I'm going to keep an eye out for that. I'll take a look at it. Thank you. And today we have a wonderful guest, and she is also a podcaster. Charlotte, will you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey. Hi, ladies. Thanks for introducing me and having me here. I'm super excited. It's going to be my first being on the other side of the interview, so it's pretty cool. Yeah, so I'm Charlotte, and my podcast that I do is call it Exploring the Extraordinary. Basically, I like to ask people about their life story, and so I guess this time I get to say a little bit of my own. I'm kind of just your average working person, late 20s, just trying to explore the world and be curious and ask questions about everything and open my mind to whatever ideas are out there, create my own judgments and make my own perspectives and pick up on what other people have ideas out there and trying to really gain like a worldview that I can relate to anybody or have a conversation with anyone. I find that I can just have an easier time with myself talking to random people that I meet on the daily, and it's kind of cool to find the unique things that people are doing, because there's definitely some unique stuff that people do.
Well, they do. And Charlotte and I met, was it a year ago? I think.
Yeah, I think almost exactly.
Almost exactly, because it was similar lovely weather. And Charlotte interviewed me, and she had reached out, and I'm not even totally clear on how we got connected. Somebody I knew you, and you were asking for people to interview. And so I volunteered, and we had a lovely interview. It was really a lot of fun. And I did learn something about Charlotte that is different from a lot of people. She works with horses and dreams of horses and thinks of horses and talks of horses almost all the time because of the deep connection. And I remember you telling me a few things about your connection with horses. And I feel like I remember you saying that especially prior to these podcasts, that you felt like you're pretty shy, and that one of the things that assisted you the way I heard you is working with horses. Does that track for you, or how did you connect with horses in the first place?
Yeah, I've been interested in horses my whole life, basically. I really got started riding lessons when I was 8, and long story short, I got signed up for them, didn't really know, it was just like, okay, this is the next thing that you're gonna do now. And I remember having like little toy horses that I'd play with before that, but I remember having like one lesson or something early on, and I just was like, wow, this is something else. This is really cool. The horse that I first rode, her name was Skipper, and she was this little Arabian Palomino. And everyone like that started riding as a kid at that place,
Railroad Skipper.
yeah, they all rode Skipper, and then I think she's passed away by now, but yeah, she's kind of the one that like got us all kind of into it. It was a pretty cool horse. You have to have always that really like kid-friendly horse if you start as a kid. Just that
Definitely.
sweet. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, and so to fast forward a few years, when you decided to do your podcast, what was the first thing that triggered for you? I know you said you wanted to learn people's experiences and stories, but not everybody decides to do a podcast when they decide to hear people's stories. What was it that started you on your podcast journey?
So before I started podcasts, I was listening to a lot of podcasts. I haven't been one to actually listen to podcasts. It's only been in the last, say, I don't know, maybe like 4 years, maybe less, off and on. And then in the last like 2.5 years or something like that, I really started to listen because I was actually, it was initiated because of the horses, actually. A lot of things that I've had transitions in my life has been horse related, interestingly enough, but it's played out as like major life events, which is really interesting. So I feel like they're kind of like, if you want to go a little like esoteric, they're kind of like my guides, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
um, so basically, I was having some trouble with my horse, and at that point, I wasn't really sure what was going on. I know now like what he's been dealing with. It's been his lifelong experience, but I was basically led down a rabbit hole of different modalities, how to connect with the horse, how to take care of him. And so I heard about this one guy, Warwick Schiller, and he's kind of one of these trainers that they call like a natural horsemanship, but he's lately more into like a spiritual connection with horses. And so he also has a podcast. I recommend even non-horse people check it out. It's pretty cool. But I started listening to his, and something that he said one day when I was listening, it was like, oh, if you really want to have a good connection with the horse, you got to start working on yourself, your relationship with yourself. And before I heard that said, I was already thinking of I need to go to counseling, to therapy for myself. I was already struggling with my mental health. And it was, basically, I have my own little podcast story, but I kind of grew up in a emotionally difficult household, pretty much emotionally abusive. It's just, I grew up in a survival type household that even though we were well off, physically, financially, mentally, it was like, you just have to survive through this. We're not going to support you emotionally. You're just going to be abandoned. And actually the children are the parents and the parents are the kids. So, I really had no like emotional guidance from adults how to navigate things. So I always kind of look to the horses how to navigate life. The responsibility, I guess, was something that taught me how to kind of listen to my own inner like intuition, you could say. And so I guess when I heard this on Warwick's podcast, I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do that for sure, because I was like, I need to figure out this problem with this horse. And I already was thinking about that. I guess my brain was like, okay, it's the sign. Let's do it.
I'm sure you've noticed, and I know we talked about it a little bit when we talked before, is that your energy and the horse's energy reflect each other. And I feel like I remember you saying that one of the reasons you felt like your horse was off track was because you were. And when you heard that, it sounds like that might have brought that idea forward for you to move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'm going to look into this, find the counselor. And, I did that. And then kind of a whole snowball effect happened in my life. It was kind of really big transition time, a lot of details there. I don't know how much I should share, but essentially, I got the horse in a better place and myself in a better place. We both had movement physically from one household to another, and sometimes that's what you need in life, is a change of space. And so, long story short, I kept listening to these podcasts, doing the self work. I felt like there was no other way how to live life other than just keep working on myself and opening up and seeing what's in there. Why do I feel down? Is it mine or somebody else's feeling that, is intermingled with my own thoughts? And like, why do I feel certain ways? And so, with listening to these podcasts, I was like, you know what, this is something that I could do. I don't see that it's so difficult. I like talking to people, and it might be kind of interesting. And yeah, I guess I listened to so many that I was like, why not? So that's kind of how I got into it. And then I never really had interviewed people before. There was like one time, there was a high school project that I did, and I had to interview somebody that was like older, like World War II time period. It was like this assignment. And so I don't know if that was like a seed planted, but I think about that sometimes when I'm working on this podcast project. I think about that interview. So it must have some sort of connection there.
And where did you start finding the people you interview?
It was kind of people I knew off the top of my head. I was like, oh, yeah, I would love to talk to this person. I'd love to talk to that person. They would be really cool. Like, it was people that I've already had conversations with, and I was like, I would love to have a even deeper conversation with them. And then part of some groups, actually, my first person I interviewed, she connected me with the online groups and said, hey, you'd probably find some more people in here. And so I think that's how we got connected.
Yeah,
Angela.
that was Angela, I think, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Angela and I had met through a local Ladies Society group, and we met in person and found that we had a lot of things in common in the way we look at things and deal with things, and so that was really interesting. And then when she told me about Charlotte, I said, sure. I mean, I'm always interested to meet new people and find out new stuff, and why not? Why not? And so, Charlotte, when you've introduced yourself and interviewed people of all kinds of genres, what are some of the genres you've talked with people about?
It can go in like any direction, but it's typically like their life story. Like, my big question I ask them is, how did you get to where you are today? And so I want people to, it's a pretty deep question.
Mhm.
And so I want people to think about what are the steps that led them to like what their daily routine is currently, what they're doing currently in their life. And I guess I kind of want to be a provocative person, even though I don't tend to express myself that way. That's how I think of myself in my head. And so I'm trying to be, that authentic self. And
A secret provocateur.
yeah,
That sounds very fancy.
yeah. Because I don't know, I feel like I've had those conversations where people, it's like, oh yeah, the weather is nice, which sometimes that's an applicable conversation to have. But sometimes you're just like struggling to figure out what should we talk about. And I'm like, oh, I would love to talk about this deep thing, but I don't know if it's the right time and the right
Yeah.
place.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you gotta set up a space for that then, some sort of platform where it's like, okay, and if you're willing, we're gonna have these kind of conversations, and then open up, kind of like, if somebody's not comfortable having that, but they would love to listen to it, well, that's how you kind of plant seeds in people's mind and they realize, oh, we should be having conversations about these things. How do you make change? You get people to start talking. You can't, I mean, sure, there, people have made change through like gathering together and rallying and all this, but I don't know that it so much makes the change without people kind of sitting down and talking and being reasonable and seeing all sides, all points of view. It's hard to have a point of view conversation when somebody's like overheated than when you're like, okay, let me just know where you're coming from. And then when you start to know where someone's coming from, you start to open up and find, oh, okay, you're triggered by this if I say this or if I do this. And then maybe if we explore that and open up, if you're willing to open up, you can slowly start to discover maybe why something bothers you, where before you were like, I'm not talking about this, or I don't know how to talk about this, or it's really intimidating, or I feel terrible. Well, all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is a safe space. We can try and talk about it. And, it kind of becomes a snowball effect if you're open to it. If you're, a little bit of curiosity, you kind of pull it out bit by bit. And so I guess that's what I'm kind of trying to do there, in a gentle way.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's probably some merit also just listening to you in doing it in public air quotations, because it kind of dictates a civility that you may not necessarily be able to maintain in a private conversation.
Mhm.
I think. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but
Yeah, exactly. It's like, why not let people in on these deep conversations? And then it's kind of like you can show them what's possible. If somebody is not familiar having a conversation like that, but yet it intrigues them, well, I think showing, having people learn, having an opportunity to learn through, showing this is what it looks like, then you can sort of start to get a feel, okay, this is when I can jump in.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Have you noticed any kind of trends with the people that you're speaking to, say trends of lives and then phases that they go through, or any kind of connection that has been a thread through the conversations?
It varies because I want to say that sometimes older people are willing to be more open and thoughtful, but I've also seen some older people not want to jump in. I think it depends if, it's kind of weird, but and it's something that I've been exploring. But I think people that have had more trauma in their life and have reflected upon it and thought about it, those people tend to be more open to discussing their feeling and how their emotions have kind of dictated where they've gone in their life. Because there have been people that I've talked to where they have maybe some trauma and they're talking about it, but they're not totally aware that that's what it was, or, oh, it's not that big of a deal, and they kind of brush it off. And I feel like I see that in a sense of a theme where people talk about, oh, back in the day, we did this and it was fine. I don't know why people are complaining about it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like, wait a minute, how do we want to progress as a society if you keep saying, oh, this, yelling at your child is okay, get over it. But if the child yells back, the parent does not like that. It's like, well,
Mhm.
where's the equal piece here? You can't expect the kid to know that that's wrong if you do it to them and then they do it back. I mean, come on,
Mm.
like, open your
Mixed
eyes.
messages.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
true. But when I was a child, that's how it was. You did it because
Mhm.
I'm the parent.
Yeah.
It
Because
never occurred to me to argue because that wasn't how it worked.
yeah.
And so it is an interesting learning curve, and it's definitely much better for children now on the whole. And I think sometimes people are taking it too far the other direction, where the children are running the entire process, which is not necessarily healthy either. But it is interesting, and it's quite a shift to go from do what I say because I say it to what do you feel about this?
Mhm. Yeah, but I think there's also something in that you say if it shifts into letting the kids run the world essentially, you have to teach them the boundaries and the both sides because asking such an open-ended question to a kid like, "Oh, what's your feeling?" Like they're not gonna
Mhm.
know how to answer that question. Like
Right.
I talk to friends where they're like, you know, this is how I discipline my kid, and I ask them, you know, tell me what I'm doing wrong, and that's too big of a question for them.
Yeah.
They can't answer that sort of
Yeah.
question. They don't know, you know. There's something to it where the kid feels that something's wrong, and I haven't been able to explain that. I'm exploring that myself. Where how did I know that this was wrong? If I saw my parents arguing, nobody ever told me that was wrong, but I somehow something inside me said this is wrong, needs to be stopped. And I would do it in my innocent child way of, hey guys, this is not okay.
Mhm.
You know, that's not okay that I was doing that, but it was like this is the only way to get it stopped, to put, you know, safety in the household, to make peace. It became my job in a sense to do that, but you're not really taking the time to okay, sit down with the kid and hey, this you should not have been doing that. I am sorry. Like you're not it's not expecting the parent to be perfect, you know. Everyone's going to slip up or, you know, do something, you know, instinctually they're going to jump and blurt something out or, you know, something's going to happen, but having that awareness to come back and say, "Hey, so like I was just acting on instinct right now and that I'm sorry, you know, that shouldn't have happened."
Mhm.
Coming full circle, you know, but I never experienced that. It was kind of funny actually. It's funny now, not then, but one of my kind of mental therapy moments that I was working on in my head, I realized this exact sort of turnaround full circle moment. I was watching a show and I saw how the parent sat down with the kid like on the edge of the bed. And I was like, you know, I don't remember having something like that where the parent sat down and said, here, let me help you process this.
Me neither.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like, wow, that's that's pretty big.
Well, and I think for Crystal, for what you're saying, I think your parents and I are far enough distant that I started to do things those things with my kids, but there's not that many years between us.
Mhm.
And it's interesting how even in just that point of reference and time and what 8 or 9 short years, things changed pretty dramatically with parents realizing that kids actually had rights, input, feelings. And what I know for me, coming kind of on the edge of both sides of that, is that our parents could only present with the tools that they had. They were definitely never given any guidelines or suggestions that worked. It was always
No.
just, yeah, what did they say? Spare the rod, spoil the child? Or is
Yeah.
that what that,
Yep.
beat them into submission and they will do what you want them to. And my partner and I were just talking this morning about how we were both essentially free range kids. We were told to go out and play and come back before it's dark and really given no guidance or anything to do. Just try to come back alive and don't kill anyone in the process. That was about it. And I don't even think those things were said. They were known though. But it's interesting as I hear the things you're saying, Charlotte, and the things that I know you and I have talked about and I've experienced related to your parents and mine, that those things have shifted a lot over the years. And it's interesting to see the product of each individual way of dealing with children and other adults and things, because we use the tools that we've got. And if we're astute and aware, we'll learn when tools don't work and look for some more. But it's hard. It's a hard process to
Well,
develop.
and it's funny because I experienced this as a child, and I'm also now experiencing it as a mother. So I'm the mother of 7 children, And my older children are all saying, well, you're so different with the younger kids. You were never like this with us. And it's like, yeah, it's called learning, y'all. Like, sorry, I did the
Mhm.
best I could. And you're all great people. So, but and I experienced the same thing. I often say my baby sister's name is Holly Sue. And I often say, Holly and I grew up with completely different parents, even though
Mhm.
they were the same parents and we're only 6 years apart. And that's just because times change, people change. My dad had some experiences that changed him spiritually and emotionally, but it's difficult. And I was going to say, when we were talking about kids running everything, my dad was his dad's 11-year-old designated driver. That was his childhood.
It's true. And then also, as you say, kind of through time and ages, I mean, my kids say that I'm more relaxed and things like that now, but also they're on their own, so I don't have to worry quite as much. But so you've got the people that you've interviewed, Charlotte, that maybe you can relate to in that way, with a childhood that felt really uncomfortable and sometimes truly scary. And what other kinds of things have you come across with interviewing people? What have you seen or found?
I found that people have really interesting lives when you ask about what, what sort of adventures have they been on. And I find that people make decisions based on their feeling, and when they do, then something really cool happens. When they make decision based on fear, then that ends up leading into, a lot of the time, struggle, and life becomes kind of difficult. And why is it not working for me? Why is it working for everyone else? And there's a difference when someone listens to what's happening internally and goes with what makes them feel good, versus, oh, I'm just going to live out of a fear stance, and we're going to survive. And there's a time when it makes sense to save resources, but there's also a time when it's a little too much, and you should just enjoy life and do the things that lead you to more joy, instead of, when I do this and when this happens, then I can be happy. Well,
Mhm.
if you are not happy right now, the chances of this and this happening and then you'll be happy, you'll still not be happy. It'll still be a struggle. You'll still be wondering, why? I thought once I got to this, it's gonna work out. No, you have to be happy with what you have, and then, more can come. But it's almost like a law of attraction, where you get more abundance for what you can handle. If you can't handle what you have now, well, then you're just kind of magnetizing more struggle and more difficulty. And it's kind of weird how that works, that you can, in a kind of crappy situation, if you're like, well, I can be happy about this and this, my health, and that I'm in one piece, at the bare minimum. It's kind of seems, in some frames of mind, difficult and like kind of ridiculous to just be happy about your health or something like that. But I mean, some people don't have that, and they, are so restrictive, and yet they can be happy. You have to go kind of primitive to build upon that. One thing that I learned, I don't know, a few months ago, there was something called spiral dynamics, and it kind of goes on this idea where you build perspective, or kind of your stance and where you are. So like, there's like a basic level where you're kind of this survival, and you can go into each of these levels based on kind of what's happening, what you're dealing with in any given moment. And some levels, kind of, that's where you stay. You don't level up to the next kind of point of view perspective. And certain, like, capitalism is in a certain level. They kind of go by colors, like green is I think green or blue is capitalism or something. And then there's like, the basic level is this beige survival. So like as a baby, you're just trying to survive. You don't really, you can't do anything on your own. And then if somebody were to break into your house, you can go back to the beige level because you're just trying to survive. And it's not to say that like one level is better than the other. They all have their purpose. They all work together. I think that's why it's like a spiral because it can go back and forth at any time. It's kind of like first grade isn't worse than fifth grade. It's just that's what you know at the time, and that's what you build off of. And so I guess I kind of have lived my life through that sort of lens. But I thought it was really cool to put it like a definition to what I already kind of had my thoughts kind of going in that sort of feel. And I don't know, it's something that's pretty cool. I recommend people looking into that. It's not super complicated, but you can make it complicated for sure.
I think we can make anything complicated,
Yeah.
whether it's good or not. It reminds me a lot of the Maslow hierarchy, though, that we
Yeah.
can't move past our basic survival needs until we've had those things met. And like you say, sometimes it goes back and forth. There are times that we can become in survival again if we're in an emergency situation or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with it. It just is where we get to be for the moment. And to lean into some of those other things. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is when you were saying that when people, the way I hear it is trust sort of their inner feelings and sort of voice, that they seem to go better than if they are working out of fear. Are you hearing any people or people saying any specific way that they listen to that inner happiness or voice, or however you'd like to describe it? Are you noticing any types of trends in that sort of feeling?
It can look different for different people in the sense of they just have a thought and they think it through and they go with it, or um, they have to make it visual, so they write something down and they do like a pros and cons list and they see, okay, I am in my head, but I'm also bringing it into reality. So sometimes when we're not taught or um, not used to listening to like subtle moments in your body, like subtle, like, oh, I have a stomach ache. Oh, it's because, I didn't feel good about whatever just happened. It's interesting that people can start to listen to themselves by making an external map in a sense, is if it's through writing or talking to somebody else and kind of having a back and forth, like, oh, how should I formulate my opinion? Talking to somebody like totally unrelated, like a friend or something like that. Hey, how do I think this through? And not always maybe talking to somebody that they're like a family member that might skew their judgment and make them go into this more of a, oh, you gotta be safe about it and survival. Maybe they talk to a friend that, oh, that's a good idea, and here's a couple more ideas to help you really strengthen this feeling that you have, because this feeling that you have maybe looks a little crazy at first glance.
Mhm.
Like I kind of did a little one of those crazy intuition moments recently. So basically with this horse stuff that I've been having in my life, I've had another little change of direction. So this horse that I talked about earlier, where I was struggling with him, he's been just, I never really could 100% fix him, which is what I thought I could do, is fix him and put him back to normal, so to speak. And so that was kind of a journey within itself, accepting that there's something going on with him and realizing it had nothing to do with what I was doing, because I got to a point where I was like, okay, I've done everything. I feel like I've exhausted the options. I've tried it all. What am I doing wrong still? Like, I've done the work and still something is not quite right here. And so, I of course then talked to other people, external, other expertise, and I start to see that, okay, I guess I'm not doing anything wrong. At this point, I have been diligent and I have been taking care and I have been doing all the right things. And so I realized one day, a few months back, that um, I basically, he has a kind of a health condition. It's not um, anything to do with the training, because it would express itself as he had a lot of anger. I had a difficult time dealing with anger growing up because anytime anger was directed towards me, it was very traumatic and I just couldn't handle it. And so this safe space of being around horses was kind of threatening, or being threatened to me, because it was like, well, I love being around the horses because they're safe and they, you know, they don't make me feel scared. I mean, of course, there's a time where you're like, oh crap, like I might get bucked off or horse got spooked, but otherwise it's like pretty much a safe space for me because they're not going to say anything in English that's going to mess up with my mental state. It's more of a, you got to just be aware of your physical surroundings that you don't like lose a limb or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, couple months ago, I had the vet out and I've been trying to do things a lot on my own, with minimal vet input. I don't know, it's kind of weird dealing with medical community at times, and then it's expensive as well, but so there's a lot you can do on your own if you study and look into things. There are resources out there, body work, and um, how to manage the farm and nutrition. So I got into all those things. And so I was like, okay, well, I've done it all and talked to other experts in the area and had the vet out. And she basically said, confirmed what I was thinking, that, yeah, I've done everything. I probably am looking at the nicest thing to do is to put this horse down, that he's actually in a lot of pain. And the anger comes from the pain that he's experiencing. So that was like a really pivotal moment for me, and like just awful, because I was already thinking it and then the vet confirmed it and I was like, wow, this is real. Okay. It's really disappointing because I had hopes and dreams, and it was like, uh, it's not possible. And
Mm-hmm.
to put all that pressure on this horse is kind of like, I need to be facing reality. There's a time to live in your head, but there's a time to live in reality and accept what's going on. So I learned about that. And I started to visit some friends, their horses, and I started to see, yeah, I really learned a lot from this horse, but I didn't do anything wrong because I was around horses that they're not physically in the best condition, but they're still like sweet enough to greet you and say hi, and they're not going to just have anger all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
so I realized, okay, it's just, he has no other way to say, hey, I'm in pain, and that's just how it comes out. And so long story short, I got an idea to ask my trainer about her horse, and it kind of came from, I was looking for like a lease or some sort of horse that I could go and enjoy and get back into enjoying that peace with the horses and enjoy riding again, and kind of unwinding myself and trying to realize, okay, it's not going to be with this horse. I still want to be involved in horses, but I need to build a new connection, a new relationship. And then I was like, if I called my trainer and she said yes, that I could lease her horse, all this struggle in my head that was happening, that could be all over in like an instant.
Mm-hmm.
And so I called her, and without hesitation, she was like, yes, for sure. Yes, you can have him. And actually, you're going to be buying him.
Oh,
Like, oh, okay. That's
surprise.
scary. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, this is definitely one of those intuition moments that I've been kind of curious about, where it feels absolutely crazy, but it feels like the right thing, and it felt like, you know, I just have to go with it and it'll work itself out. One of those kind of stories that I heard other people having. And so I
Mhm.
guess it was like the first time I got to experience it for myself. And so yeah, it's been like 2 weeks now, and I have we have a little farm at my friend's place, and so now we have 3 horses, went from 2 to 3. Still gonna at some point when my horse that I was struggling with, when he's ready, I'm gonna do the peaceful thing and, let him transition over. But it's been kind of a cool journey because I'm learning different things that I didn't know I needed to learn. And one thing that came out of that is learning how to grieve properly. So that's been interesting. And I learned that there was a horse that I had before this one that I struggled with when I was a teenager. And he was like the horse that kind of helped me through my teenage years. And then I gave him to somebody when I was in college, and I don't know what they did, but eventually he was colicking, and it was like an emergency, and they were like, we have to put him down. And I wasn't part of the decision in that, and I wanted to be kind of included in what was going on, but it was very vague with
Mhm.
what was happening. And so it was like in an instant, I lost this first horse that I ever had. And with the grief of my current horse, I realized that I never grieved properly horse number one. And so I'm like, oh, wow, I'm actually grieving 2 horses right now. And then all these other things that I realized I didn't grieve, like realizing that my family wanted to put up this image of, oh, we're a normal average family, but then I learn about other people's families that they're not as, like, yeah, there's dysfunction in every family, but there's, on top of that, unconditional love. And I never experienced unconditional love. I always experienced conditional love. Like, if you do this and this, then we'll, you know, say we love you or whatever. And
Mhm.
so I started realizing that there was grief there. And so I'm like in this process of learning like all these things that I'm having to grieve. And again, the horse is teaching me that. And I'm starting to, in a way, feel relieved. It's weird how I feel like guilty on one hand to feel that grief can make me feel relieved. But on the other hand, it's like when you accept the grief and you're learning to explore it, it's not as horrible as we kind of as a society shut ourselves away from. Oh, we don't even talk about it, but let's pretend this didn't even happen, but we're going to struggle inside and we're just going to feel horrible that now we're grieving loss of somebody or something. Kind of the journey that I've been on lately.
That's
And
really interesting. I know that
yeah.
I've been reading this book, and it's a novel, so it's not. It may be loosely based on a story. I don't know. But one of the things she said is that she is a survivor of a very traumatic experience,
Mm,
and she said that people don't know how to talk about that. They don't
mhm,
know how to deal with an uncomfortable subject. And one of the things that I think is so important is to learn how to do that in a way that's healthy for everyone involved.
mhm,
Because, and especially I think even more in our country than others, we don't even deal with the grief of death of our family members. It's all separate from us, it's all removed. Children aren't exposed to it in our country, especially
mhm.
where they are in other countries or any part of grief with anything that we experience. So I think it's a really important thing to to recognize and to support each other through. I can't do anything about your horse that needs to eventually go over the, if horses go over the rainbow bridge. I don't know if horses do the same as dogs and cats, but if when it's time to pass, there's nothing I could do to change it, but as a friend, I could support you and I could listen to you talk about it. And I feel like there's a lot of times where we, because it feels uncomfortable, don't like to address it. I know that when I had my cancer experience, people were afraid to say anything about it. It's like, what, you think I don't know? I mean,
Yeah.
why don't you want to mention it? But people were afraid to make me feel uncomfortable. And when they acted weird, whether it was about that or any of the other circumstances that I think any of us have found ourselves in, if we don't say, hi, I'm good, then people go, wait, what? You're going to tell me something real? I don't know if I can deal with that.
It's actually why whenever I start talking about art, I
Mhm.
always immediately start with my dead brother art. So they know that they don't have to be delicate about it. You know,
Mhm.
like he's been dead for 17 years. Like I have grieved and it's not an uncomfortable topic for me. So let's not make it an uncomfortable topic for anybody.
Yeah, and if you bring it up that way, that makes sense because then they're like, "Oh, I guess she knows." And
Yeah.
right, yeah, we do know. And grief is not a straight line either. I mean, and Charlotte, maybe you're finding this with your first horse, that when you feel like you didn't get a chance to grieve that horse, and now you're grieving this other horse while he's still here, but not matching the picture of what you expected. There are definitely emotions and times that you'll deal with that, and I know that people who have lost either pets or family members or friends or whatever, people say, well, after a year, are you over it? Wait, not, no, 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 I'm not going to be over it.
Right.
I am shifted. I may do something differently. I may not be crying all day long. I have a friend whose husband, she had to place in a home because he has Alzheimer's and was getting too combative and was hurting her. She couldn't keep taking care of him. He's still alive. She still sees him. She did this. It's been a year now. And I met with her at lunch the other day and she said, well, I'm really happy because I'm not crying all day, every day anymore. And it's been more than a year. And so that magic time of, okay, well, you know what? Your grief is over. Move on. Let's not talk about it anymore is so detrimental to our society. It's just shocking to me that we still maintain these premises that we don't get to talk about this because it's uncomfortable or not good or whatever. So it's just an interesting perspective.
I have a
You know,
daughter who grieves a horse actually
oh,
actively. I think he died 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And she deeply, deeply grieves this horse. And I can tell you that as a mother, very beleaguered mother,
Mhm.
there's absolutely a voice in my head that is like, "Ugh, get over it." But I would never say that to her because that's not how it works, you know. It's and so, you know, all I can do is help her express the grief and work through it, right?
Mhm.
Um, and like you were saying, the reason I laughed is because you said, you know, in a year, are you over it? It's like, well, in 17 years, I'm not over it. I'm still
Mhm.
mad that he died. I'm still, you know, I'm still annoyed. I'm still bummed. Um, but yeah, like you said, it's a shift. Like I'm not
Mhm.
crying every day. I'm not wishing I could pick up the phone and call him. I'm not, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, one of the things talking about this child of yours who I know and the horse I know, um, this horse, at least from my perspective, and I know I can be very wrong on this, but the relationship between her and the horse could look like to a lot of people not to be a significant relationship. It's like,
Hmm.
so you sat on the horse once in a while. I mean,
Hmm.
and we could say that.
Hmm.
And we cannot judge how this relationship of any kind affected another person.
Yep.
My daughter, her great grandmother died the same day she was delivered in the same hospital. And my daughter has always felt a very strong connection to that grandmother. And she actually went to her funeral as a newborn. And I took Joshua, my son, as well, who was almost 3, and they may have experienced something, maybe they didn't, but always, even till now, she has a stronger connection to this grandmother than I ever would have imagined, because she just always felt that connection. Now we can come up with a lot of reasons why. Did they pass in the celestial hallway? Did they, how does this work? I don't know. I just know that she's had a very strong connection. And she had never seen a picture of this grandma until one time she was at her other side great grandmother's house, and they had a photo album out. And there was a picture of this older lady, and it was the grandma she had been born the same day of her passing. And she said, well, that's Grandma Miller, isn't it? And I didn't know, because I mean, I had met her, but I just didn't know her that well. And it was a younger picture of her. And her other grandma said, yeah, that is. And Juliana had never seen this grandma, but she knew that's who it was, and has always had that connection. So I don't think we can, the point is, I don't feel like we can judge the relationships that other people have, whether we think they're a valid relationship or not.
Spoiler alert, that it was also my children's great grandmother. They didn't know her at all, though.
No, they were too young. Just for our listeners who are going, wait, what? I was married to my kid's father and then divorced him. We say this clearly so it doesn't sound weird. And then Crystal married him and later also divorced him. So we have a lot of shared history. And since you said that, I can say our granddaughter passed away at 4 months old. And, we have that we both have dealt with and have definitely dealt with in different levels of connection to, say, the parents, because her parents, Zendaya's parents, were living with me. And of course, they're related to Crystal as well, in the obscure Hatfield kind of ways that we relate to each other. And it's interesting because it's a shared granddaughter, and our experiences in relationship with her were different. It doesn't mean that the grief is more or less. It's probably different because we're different people too. And we can't judge each other's experiences. And
Right.
for me, that's the bottom line.
Well, and it's actually, sorry to keep making this about us, Charlotte, but that's exactly the same with Odyssey's relationship with Zendaya. Like, from the outside, if you will, it looks like what relationship? But she feels deeply, deeply attached to Zendaya. Odyssey's my oldest daughter with our ex-husband.
That always sounds so funny. And it's interesting. I mean, have you met people in either your own personal life, Charlotte, or in your experience with interviewing people that have relationships that you've kind of heard them talk about and go, it's interesting to me how that affected you? Have you heard stories like that, or are we just the outliers?
Do you mean like somebody that they didn't know and that they have a connection with them, even though?
Yeah, or even just that they had a relationship that didn't look like it was that much of a big deal, but they still strongly connected for some reason.
Yeah, I would say I've even experienced something like that where it doesn't make sense. You don't have such a connection with them, but maybe like later on you feel like, oh wow, there's connection. Like I can say that we had a family friend when I was growing up, and they lived across the street from us. And the wife, I think she found us the house that I grew up in, and my parents had met them. Essentially, we were like really easy friends because then we lived across the street from them one day, and we would go see them like all the time, and they were kind of like grandparents to me and me and my brother, I guess, because they were older than my parents. Yet we were kind of friends with them, and usually I would hang out with the wife because she was like fun, like older lady. She had this really cool garden, and it was a lot of fun to have her show me like all her gardening stuff. And so her husband, like, he was nice too. He was kind of like this grandfather, kind of wise guy. So it was kind of like if there was something going on with my parents, they would go to him for like counseling or something like that for some wisdom. And I was always like terrified of him. There was one time we were visiting, and he had some part of the garden because they had acreage. And I feel like he had like shown me some, I don't know, some kiwis or something that he had. And then I was visiting them. I think I had a friend with me, and I was like, "Oh, look at these kiwis that he has." He showed me them. And then he like came around the corner and was like, "Don't touch them." And I was like, "Oh, I thought it was okay."
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, he just had this air about him that he was like well traveled and, this like intimidating to kids sort of guy. And actually, oh, when I talked about earlier, he was actually the guy that I interviewed in high school. And so I kind of like, I guess maybe that was where the seed kind of planted, where I kind of looked up to him because I was like, wow, you had a really cool life. He had a moment where he was alive during like World War II, like Nazis and, that sort of time period. He was, I believe he was in Czech Republic at the time. And he had an encounter with a Nazi soldier with a horse, and the soldier told him, "If you give me hay for my horse, I'll let you go." Because I think he had like some Jewish background, or he looked Jewish or something, but he would have been taken essentially.
Wow.
And um, that story always sat in my head that, wow, he had like a brush with death and was let go. And like, I went on my way after the interview and like, whatever, I didn't see that we were more friends and that he was more friendly with me after that interview. It was kind of like the same dynamic. Maybe he was like talking to me a little bit more, but I was just like, whatever. He's kind of neat dude. But he's since passed, and I went to his celebration of life. It was a few years now. But I feel like I think about him more so, in the recent time. And I'm like, that's really weird. I don't know that I had like a connection with him or
Mhm.
anything. I always like
Mhm.
kind of feared him, but I kind of look up to him now and like, wow, that guy really like led a cool life. And I like think about some of the things that he told me as like, oh, that was really cool. And I think also something, I work my daytime job, office job, I work for an engineering firm. I'm not an engineer, but I, talk with people who are engineers every day. And this guy that I'm talking about, he was an engineer. And so I guess sometimes the things that he said, it like sparks in my mind, like, oh, I can kind of relate to these engineers because I knew somebody as a child that was an engineer, even though like I didn't grow up around engineers. My parents definitely weren't in that. And so I think that's kind of a neat connection that, yeah, it's hard to explain. That doesn't make much sense. So I think that kind of goes with what you both are explaining.
Well, it does to me. And also, I feel like sometimes we need to gain experience and perspective before we can really understand some of the interactions we've had that may have been much deeper than a 10 or 12-year-old or however you were could possibly ever relate to. And now as you're maturing and you're considering the conversations, interactions that you're having now and the conversations, interactions you had as a child, maybe gelling a little bit more than they had before, which is completely appropriate and expected given age and maturity. Because what, as nurses, we know that the brain doesn't fully develop until we're 26. Wow.
Right.
We had to make a lot of decisions before we were 26. What was going on? But I do believe that has part of it. And I feel in most people I've met, there is an emotional softening too. People, especially who have worked through their traumas, people who haven't definitely are not emotionally soft or available most of the time. But I feel like some of the things that you're saying, Charlotte, with some of the things you've worked through, you're probably open more now to look outside yourself than you had been prior because you're feeling safer and because you're feeling stronger from the things you're describing. That sounds like that is what's happening, and that could contribute to it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, I'm feeling safer within myself and more okay to make my own decisions, and that it's not as terrifying to do something, to go and even simply talk to somebody. I
Mhm.
mean, it's kind of coming back to this spiral idea, it comes and goes. Like I still have these like residual, it almost feels more so like a body reaction. I feel like
Hmm.
I can reason with things and do like the mental work in my head, but sometimes the mental stuff is locked in on my body and it becomes a like a physical
Hmm.
barrier. I don't know how to like articulate it other than saying like my mind has created a physical barrier in my body that I can't like blurt certain things out. I can't say certain things that make me uncomfortable. Like I can talk about it, but being using specific words, it's really weird. Some things to me are more of a specific word is a trigger, and um I don't know how to get over it other than I need to look into something that's like a physical therapy to like unlock the physical emotion outside of my body. And I'm sure you probably are familiar with this, Andrea, with
There are a lot of things that can be done, and one of the things that I mean, I'm happy to talk with you more about it after we finish another time, but there's also something called somatic workouts or somatic exercises, which can help physically release some of the things that we've held for all of our lives. And excuse me, especially as children, we tended to shrink if we felt like we were being assaulted. And so that opens all of that space up, and it can be very freeing. And one of the things that when I was in school for massage, and also Crystal is a Reiki master as well, what we learned in Reiki is that people will have releases that no one expects. There have been people I've worked on just doing a regular massage and they burst into tears. Did I hurt you? No, I don't know what happened. Something released. And that's amazing and wonderful. And so it's really, there's a lot to do with the body that can release those emotions that we've, like you said, created physical barriers for. And sometimes those had been our warning signs, especially as a child. My stomach's getting upset. That means I'm uncomfortable. It means I have to do X, Y, and Z to feel safe. X, Y, and Z may not have really been a thing that worked, but that's what we did. That was the step that we, as a child especially, decided was going to be efficient. And we have built our lives around those sorts of things in our decision as children. And so it's fascinating. There's a lot we could talk about on a different episode or a different conversation that can work on those physical releases. So they're pretty huge. That's awesome. Well, this has been awesome. It's really been interesting to hear from you, Charlotte, and learn more about what you're doing and how you're doing it. How can our listeners listen to your podcast?
yeah, it's on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So I have it in those two places. I think that's most people can access that. I also have a little Instagram thing. I believe it's at Extraordinary Pod. And then you can also just reach out to me online, Charlotte. I have my husband's name on my social media, so I go by Charlotte Osterholt. But I'm sure if you do Charlotte Karasek, it would pop up as well.
Awesome. And remind us again of the name of your podcast.
It's Exploring the Extraordinary.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Crystal?
No, thank you so much. It was really delightful talking to you.
Yeah,
Indeed.
you too.
We'd love to hear from our listeners. Please contact us at mysticdetectives.com to leave a comment, share a story, or ask a question. As always, we invite you to subscribe, share, and leave reviews to support the podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Stay curious
And keep exploring.